Welcome, everybody, to the Jim Acosta Show, or should I call this the Jim Acosta Chat Group? Those seem to be very popular in Washington right now. As you can see, joining me on today's show is Pete Buttigieg, the former Secretary of Transportation during Joe Biden's administration, and also a Democratic presidential candidate at one point. Do we call you Mayor Pete anymore? Just Pete? What do we call you now?
Pete's just
Secretary
fine.
Pete?
Yeah, let's go with Pete.
We'll go with Pete. Hey, Pete, thank you so much for doing. That's what the folks who are chiming in with their chats are saying right now. Really appreciate it. There are lots of places where we can start. One is, welcome to this new media revolution that's taking place right now in independent media. That's what Substack is all about, and so it's good to see you here. And I've noticed you've already picked up quite the following.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Substack and planning to spend more time using this platform. I think probably like a lot of people who are a little familiar with it, I
Yeah.
had assumed it was something kind of along the lines of some of the other blog sites you see there, good for publishing longer essays, which I did recently, explaining my decision making about running for office, but didn't really
Yeah.
understand how you can do everything from a short comment to something like this. So this is me I guess dipping my toe into the waters of video on Substack, but excited to be in touch with your audience and with mine in a new way.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, just a couple of months ago, I thought Substack was a place where you would write articles and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Didn't realize they had this live feature. So it's very fun. It's intimate. Subscribers get to weigh in and give their comments, and perhaps we'll take a look at some of those comments. But I have to ask you about the news of the day.
Yeah.
It is day 3 of Signalgate here in Washington, as the White House and top administration officials are engaging in basically all out lying, let's just be honest about this, to cover up the divulging of classified war planning information to reporter Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic in a chat group text thread on the encrypted messaging app Signal. You're here as well. We're going to have Hakeem Jeffries, the House Democratic leader, later on in the program. I should note that. But I'm just curious. The Senate Intelligence Committee was looking at this yesterday. The House Intelligence Committee was looking at all of this today, asking big questions. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a Republican, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, has called for an investigation. Where does it go from here, do you think?
Well, what we've seen so far is that it was bad from the jump, and the administration and the White House keep making it worse. In my experience, when something bad happens, when there's a big mistake, you deal with it, you own it, and you move on. Especially if you want people to believe that you care about accountability. The really shocking thing for me is, you know, th- this is a president whose entire persona was about firing people, right? The whole shtick of his
Yeah.
show was firing people, kind of for fun. He was play acting at firing people, but still, that was his whole thing. Now, in my experience, including as mayor of a city, I hated firing people, but there were times when you had to hold somebody accountable for their performance and they had to go. We're seeing no indication of that here. On the contrary, we are seeing what is at best stonewalling, at worst lying to Congress. Somewhere on that spectrum, that's exactly what's been happening these last couple days. Congress has questions, really basic questions, like were you using your personal phone? How
Yeah.
could somebody have gotten onto this chat who wasn't authorized? Why were you discussing highly sensitive, classified information on an unclassified channel? If you're claiming for some reason this somehow wasn't classified, what's up with that? Because it definitely should have been. And a whole bunch
Right.
of other questions, and they won't even answer the basic factual questions, or when they do, they don't seem to be telling the truth. So where do we go from here? I think this is a moment of truth for Congress, because this should not be a Democrat Republican thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if this happened in a Democratic administration, I would be just as horrified, and I think Americans would be just as upset. And I can tell you, I think Congress, Democrat or Republican, would have been all over us if
Oh,
anything of
yeah.
these proportions had ever happened during
Yeah.
the time that I was involved in administration. To say nothing of what happened, part of me thinks of this as a former cabinet member.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks of this as a former intelligence officer.
Right.
If anything even close to this had happened when I was a lieutenant, I mean, they would have had your ass so quickly. I can't even begin to tell you how much trouble you would have been in and how fast. And so this is a moment of Congress where a
Yeah.
moment of truth. We're going to see if Congress is serious. Now, you
Yeah.
mentioned Senator Wicker. I know him well because he was before he was chairing Armed Services. He was chairing the committee that oversaw my department, the U.S. DOT. He is very conservative, very Republican, but I have also seen him show a lot of integrity over the years. It'd be very interesting to see what he does next.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about another Pete, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, because during his confirmation hearings, he was all about, you should be merit based. He was very anti DEI. He suggested that anybody who got a position at the Pentagon who was not a white Christian was basically there because of DEI, and it wasn't merit based. And all along, a lot of the critics were saying, "Well, what about you?" Secretary Hegseth, you didn't exactly become this nominee for Secretary of Defense just on merit. I mean, it was mainly because Donald Trump liked watching you on Fox. I mean, this is what he texted in this group chat. I'm just going to read some of this for our viewers who are just catching up on this. Time now, 11:44 Eastern Time. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are a go for mission launch. 12:15 Eastern Time. F-18's launch. Goes on, Pete. And the astounding thing to me is the way the administration is trying to say, oh, well, this isn't classified information or this isn't war planning information. It's clearly, if you go through these texts, it's very detailed attack planning for these airstrikes. And it just strikes me as amateur hour over there at the Pentagon and among several of these folks who were on this group chat.
Well, they would be a lot more credible if they said, yeah, this was a huge screw up and
Yeah,
here's how it happened. We're getting to the bottom of it. Instead, they're trying to minimize it. I mean, trying to quibble over the difference between a war plan and a battle plan or an attack plan and a
right,
strike plan.
right,
The point is that sensitive information about an impending military attack involving physical movements of U.S. troops in a kinetic environment was sent on an unclassified channel and sent to the wrong guy.
right.
And it's a good thing it wasn't the wrong guy, because this
Exactly.
could have gone to the Russian ambassador. Who knows who could have gotten this? And just as importantly, if we know about this one time, and we're only what, a few weeks into this administration, how many other times might this have happened that we don't know about because the person who found out about it at best kept it to themselves and at worst used it in some nefarious way?
Yeah, that's true. And Senator Adam Schiff is requesting information on the travels of Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And one of the reasons why is because Witkoff apparently was in Russia at the time, meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Pete, I remember during my days covering the White House during the Trump White House. We went to Beijing for a POTUS trip to see Xi Jinping. They took, we had to give up our phones, we had to give up our laptops. You couldn't bring, comms equipment into Beijing because you had the assumption that everything was going to be hacked into. You have to have the assumption
Yep.
that Witkoff knew that, or the people around him knew that his devices were going to be hacked into by the Russians or surveilled by the Russians. I mean, that is a scary proposition there that perhaps his devices were being surveilled as he was, involved in this group chat.
Absolutely. Look, we
Yeah,
don't know whether what he, if anything, he would have been doing with his personal device in Russia, but that's exactly one of the questions that needs to be very quickly answered. When I went to Ukraine, uh, I left my phone with somebody on the other side of the border, just knowing how much Russian surveillance could be in there. And so the idea that
right.
somebody, again, it almost defies imagination. We're talking about basically a text thread with the Vice President of the United States, SecDef, and a whole bunch of others on somebody's phone while they were in Russia. We need some answers on that.
Yeah,
We know the kinds of things that they do by way of phone hacking. By the way, this is exactly why we have classified systems
right.
for
That's right.
discussing this kind of thing. And
Yeah,
it's not like it's impossible for these guys to get onto a classified system. Some of them, like the Secretary of Defense and the VP, literally have an airplane going with them, not just for convenience, but specifically to carry the kind of the kind of hardened communication systems that are not susceptible to that kind of interference or espionage, so that you can, I don't know, do things like talk about a military attack before it happens without wondering if it was
yeah.
going to get into the wrong hands.
Right. I mean, everybody has access to a skiff at this level inside an administration. They have the Situation Room over at the White House. Presumably, they could have had access to some kind of skiff wherever they were so they could join this kind of conversation or have a classified satellite phone or cell phone or something along those lines. And I mean, Jeffrey Goldberg picked up on this because he was getting a text. I think he said in this parking lot of a Safeway in the DC area, which is incredible. Hakeem Jeffries, who's going to be on in the program in a little bit, has called for Pete Hegseth to be fired. Do you think head should roll? We should see somebody fired over this?
Yeah, no question. Even more so because he has refused to take responsibility. If you screw up this badly, the very least you could do to save your job would be to man up, explain yourself, and make clear why it wouldn't happen again. I don't think
Yeah.
that would have been good enough, but it would have been better than just blurting out insults at the reporter who was
Yeah.
involved and not answering any of the actual questions when he was asked about this after having, I think some time during his plane ride to think up a better answer. The other thing that he needs to explain, and this is a question Congress I know is asking, and it would be the first question I would be asking if I were the president and knew this happened, is how did the information move from a
Mm.
classified system to an unclassified system? I mean, again, the
Right.
amount of trouble you could get in as a sergeant in the army
Unbelievable.
if you
Yeah.
took a sheet of paper that was printed off a top secret printer and left it in a folder that could have gone into a non top secret room is enormous. There
Yeah.
are whole different computer systems. So this information was on a classified system, and then it wasn't. Somebody
Yeah.
moved it, and that somebody, it would appear, would be Secretary Hegseth. He
Yeah.
needs to explain how he did that and why.
Yeah, there's no question about it, and it's not going to be. I mean, you have to have hearings. It seems to me with these individuals testifying, or else it's just a cover up, and they're trying to sweep it under the rug. And I suppose, Trump appears to be in the middle of that right now. He's trying to change the subject, wag the dog a little bit. Apparently, he's announcing tariffs on the auto industry at this hour. I do want to switch to other topics because I know you did think about running for the Senate for governor in Michigan. That's a state that has been affected by tariffs put in place by the Trump administration, by Donald Trump. What do you think about the way he has handled these tariffs? Do you like tariffs? What are your views on tariffs?
Well, I think there is a real risk of destroying American jobs and hurting American workers. And I think that's what's going to happen. Let me be clear,
Yeah.
there are some times, cases, and places where it makes sense to use tariffs. Last administration, we would use tariffs sometimes to protect American industry. But the kind of stuff they're talking about, in order to work, it's got to be targeted, it's got to be predictable, it's got to be part of a strategy. What we're seeing here is this incredibly chaotic on again, off again. I've talked to small business owners as
Mhm.
well as people in industry who are kind of paralyzed because they don't know how to respond to this given that it keeps changing from week to week. We know this is going to make cars more expensive. Our whole policy when I was in Washington was try to make cars less expensive. They seem to be deliberately making cars more expensive
Right.
at a time when the biggest problem in our economy is still affordability and things costing too much. And
Yeah.
what we're seeing here is an incredibly reckless approach. Now we'll see exactly what is going to be announced today, but given their
Yeah.
track record so far, it's not very encouraging, especially when you see the chaos that it's already brought to the auto industry. And
Yeah.
look, the auto industry is at the heart of why I'm in public life. I grew up in a city that was a company town for Studebaker. They
Mm.
made cars until 1963 when the last Studebaker rolled off the line. And
And
50
congrats to
years
you, Pete,
later,
for knowing what a Studebaker is. But anyway, go ahead.
oh, yeah, I mean, where I'm from, that's a huge deal. South Bend,
Yeah.
Indiana, much bigger employer than Notre Dame ever was at the
Yeah.
time, was Studebaker.
Wow.
And when I became mayor 50 years later, we as a city were still licking our wounds from losing that kind of manufacturing. Um, so much so that the whole kind of project of the time I was in office was to move on from that economically. And then I
Mm.
got into politics, running against an ideologue who was the state treasurer of Indiana, who tried to block the Obama Biden administration when they were
Mm.
saving Chrysler, because I
Wow.
knew what letting Chrysler go out of business would do, and I wanted to take a stand for them. I didn't win that race, but that was the first race I ever ran.
Wow.
I really care about this stuff,
Mm.
and having grown up in a former auto town, living now in America's biggest auto state of Michigan, they're playing with people's lives. Whether you work
Yeah.
directly in the auto industry and your jobs could be on the line, or whether you're just like most of us and you're hoping to be able to afford your next car and
Yeah.
not wanting to see the prices go through the roof.
Yeah, I mean, and sure, the Democrats lost in the 2024 race, but the economy was trending in the right direction. I mean, I think just about if you turn on CNBC, just about anybody who comments on CNBC would agree that the economy was heading in the right direction. The stock market was looking good, the jobs picture was looking good, inflation was trending in the right direction, and now there's a huge amount of economic uncertainty in the air. Wall Street does not know what to make of the tariffs that are being put in place. They don't know what the effect is going to be on inflation. Over at the Fed, they just don't seem to know what to do about interest rates at this point, because of what's taking place with these tariffs. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how to perhaps add a little more certainty to the economy right now. I mean, should Trump just reverse course on these tariffs? I mean, what's the Buttigieg?
Yeah, I mean,
I know
look,
we're a
I'm
long way
not
off
here to
from
say
2028,
everything.
but what are your thoughts? Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not here to say everything was fine a year
yeah,
ago and we should make it
sure,
just like it was.
yeah,
Here's the way I would put it. The economy that was handed to the Trump administration had a lot of things going well and a lot of things that were not going well. So let's break this down a little bit. What was going well? Actually, one of the things that was going best was investments in factories. The most factory building in my lifetime happened last year. The jobs numbers were looking good. The stock market was high, but what was the thing that was not going well? That was prices, affordability. Right
yeah,
now, here's the really weird thing. What they're doing now is upside down. The problems that you would theoretically solve with tariffs was if nobody was building factories. But like I just
mm.
said, factories here, manufacturing here was rising.
It was moving. Yes, exactly.
Meanwhile, the thing that tariffs definitely make worse is prices. So you're making the thing that was worst in our economy, which is prices, you're making it even worse in order to theoretically do something about jobs and manufacturing. But those were some of the things in our economy that were headed in the right direction. So it's
Yeah.
perfectly upside down.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that has gotten people pretty fired up these days is what Elon Musk is doing with DOGE. I mean, to me, it's kind of staggering that you would see, the richest man in the world be given the keys to, basically every federal agency. And, and in cases where they don't have the keys, they're trying to barge their way in and take over these agencies. And in some cases, you have these young staffers at DOGE trying to get access to people's personal private information. They're hoovering up data at various agencies and so on. I guess, first of all, your thoughts on what Elon Musk has been doing as he's been given a very big role in this administration, and then also the impact of places like the Social Security Administration. One thing that's been coming out in the last couple of days, there are all these job and staff cuts over at Social Security, and it's leading to long lines and a great deal of stress from people wondering, am I going to be able to get my Social Security check?
Look, to me, the whole point of government is to deliver services that make people better off and to help make people free, to protect people so that you're more free in your everyday life. And what we're seeing here, look, in theory, what they claim they're doing is something that if they were actually doing it, I would love to see, which is finding cases where something is broken or wasteful in the government and fixing it. If that was really the mission, I'd be all on board because I can tell you, both as an American and as somebody who's been in the middle
Mm,
of a big federal agency, there's all kinds of things I would like to change. We changed what we could when I was in there. There's more to do to make things less bureaucratic, simpler, more straightforward, more transparent. If DOGE was about that, I would be cheering them on. But instead, what we're seeing is they're just breaking stuff right and left. And the most important thing is results. You mentioned Social Security, and this is a huge deal. And you can't fake this. If you're watching this and you're on Social Security and you have uh, gotten on the phone trying to get something done, you're probably aware that the wait times have doubled on the phone lines since these guys came in.
yeah.
They've taken some things, you can't even do them over the phone anymore. You've got to, they're telling people to go online. They're telling seniors, they're telling people in their 80s and 90s to just do it online.
Yeah, and there was some guy out in Seattle who was told, this was reported in the Seattle newspaper, that they think he was dead and that he couldn't collect any more Social Security payments, so he had to go down to his local Social Security office, and he tried to jump the line, is what he told the local press out in Seattle, so he can get to the bottom of what was going on. I mean, it just seems that people are freaked out right now about Social Security. And then just the other day, the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who is a billionaire, he's one of several billionaires in this administration, said his mother-in-law would not complain if she didn't receive her Social Security check. I mean, I just thought that was the epitome of being tone deaf. What in the world are they thinking over there making those kinds of comments?
Look, I don't think they're terribly worried about Social Security.
Yeah.
These are very rich men. More than that, I mean, a lot of them
Yeah.
ideologically would rather not have Social Security, which is why Project 2025 contains a lot of evidence of their agenda.
Yeah.
It's one more part of this very ideological agenda. I got a piece of mail right here in my mailbox in Michigan during the campaign from the Trump campaign, swearing up and down that Donald Trump had nothing to do with Project 2025.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing that agenda play out in a lot of different ways. And one of them is the Republicans have been trying to dismantle or privatize Social Security for decades. And now they feel like they have their chance. Now they know that if they just passed a bill to get rid of Social Security, the American people wouldn't stand for it. So instead, they're kind of screwing it up from the inside. They're making it kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy as they break the system. But we got to get out of this idea that these are quote unquote entitlements. This is something you pay for. Like
Right.
you and I and every American worker on our paycheck, we pay into this system. It's an insurance system, not a
Yeah.
gift. And they're screwing it up from the inside.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard you describe yourself as an elder millennial. I consider myself a youthful Gen Xer. And if somebody takes my Social Security away before I turn whatever it is, 62, 65, 67, whatever it is, I'm going to be pretty pissed off. I mean, I'll just be really honest with you. I just,
Yeah.
and I probably don't need Social Security to retire. I will admit that, having worked in the news business for a long time, I should be okay. But hell, if I'm not going to get that money that I paid into the system, and I think a lot of other people feel the same. I think about my dad, my parents who worked blue collar jobs, raising me. I mean, you can't monkey around with that system.
That's right, because
Yeah.
people really do count on it. And look,
Yeah.
I think there's actually a through line here between the news of the day on Signalgate or whatever we're going to call it, and this stuff with Social Security, which is they're incredibly reckless because they're not that worried about it. Most of the folks playing these games fast and loose with classified information or sensitive information that could get American troops killed, they're not very close to the front lines here, right? It's not
Yeah.
their personal problem. And
Mm.
same thing on the economy. Like they're playing all these games, and if they screw up, if stocks keep going down like they've been doing overall since Trump came in, if Social Security checks don't go out, if more people lose their jobs, if prices keep going up, uh, that's just not their problem.
Yeah.
They'll be worried about it as politicians,
Yeah.
but they're not that worried about it as people.
Can I ask you some political questions? I mean, we
Yeah.
have been talking politics, but when Trump talks about invading Greenland and Canada being the 51st state and taking over the Panama Canal, do you buy any of that stuff? Do you think he's just throwing this horse crap out there to sort of distract people? Do you think he's serious about it? Do you think he's nuts? I mean, is it a combination of all three?
I
What do you?
actually think there's more cohesion to this than
Hmm,
he gets credit for. And what I
okay.
mean by that is he does have a certain foreign policy worldview. And the best way to
Mhm.
explain it is that it's spheres of influence. So you notice all the places you just mentioned are in North America or in the Americas, right? They're the places physically close to the United States. And his attitude is they're kind of around. We should control them or run them or in some way exert our power over them. And if you think about it that way, that helps to explain his attitude toward Russia. And there might be some other
Yeah.
stuff going on with him and Putin. I don't know. But
Yeah.
one thing that you see is, there's this idea. All right, Russia can throw their weight around in their backyard, and America can throw our weight around in our yard. And it's a completely different idea from the idea that values and rules should matter. And one area where this could come to a head is when it comes to China, because even though there's a lot of belligerent rhetoric around China, for a guy like Donald Trump who thinks that if you have enough power, you should be able to do what you want in your backyard, if push came to shove in Taiwan, do you really think Donald Trump's going to be a credible
Yeah.
defender of Taiwanese autonomy, or do you think he's going to try to cut the deal of the century?
Yeah, and you've got me thinking about Ukraine when you make that comment because, when the way he dressed down Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office, the way just at every turn it seems he caters to Vladimir Putin, it worries me as an American that if Trump were to let Vladimir Putin get away with taking over Ukraine, to me, that would just blow a hole in NATO. NATO would basically not exist anymore because obviously the lesson Putin is going to take away from that. Okay, let's go after Estonia. Let's go after Moldova. Let's go. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Putin's not the kind of guy who's going to get what he wants on one thing
Yeah.
and be like, okay, I guess I'm done now. I'll go home, right? Like, obviously, he will
Yeah.
continue pushing the boundaries as far as he can. I mean, you would have thought that attacking the integrity of our elections a decade ago was a red line, but he crossed that, got away with it, kept seeing what else he could do.
Yeah.
Um, and now you've got, obviously he's playing for Ukraine. There's so many other areas where, whether it's an outright invasion or some other way that he asserts influence, of course he's going to
Yeah.
keep going.
Of course. Okay, I've got to ask you this. How's it going being a dad? You said you didn't want to run in Michigan. I assume that's because, and I worked at the White House for 7.5 years covering Obama and Trump. I knew I needed a break after that was done. I'm sure you needed a break after you're done being the Secretary of Transportation, which is a much bigger job. How's it going being a dad? Are you resting up for 2028? I turned that into a political question, so there you go.
Well, look, on 28, it's just too soon to know what the world's going to look like and what my life is going to look like. But what I will say is, I'm really enjoying being a dad, being more invested in that. Obviously, I did my best while I was serving as secretary to be there
Yeah,
for my kids and be there for Chas and my husband, who was doing so much of the lifting. But you got a job like that, and you're on the road, at least half the time. And even when you're there, you're not exactly there. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Matter of fact, as we speak, this is the 1 year mark since the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, which
that's
was
right.
one of many of those grave moments where you get a call in the middle of the night and then it's 24/7 for a while. So uh, being able to turn the ringer of my phone off, um,
It's not
being
bad.
able to be the one dropping off the kids most days at school, being able to just read to them and do my part getting lunch and dinner ready, has been great. I mean, it's
Yeah,
work. Parenting is work. It's the hardest thing I think Chasten or I have ever done, but it's also the best. And it's just every day there's something new or something funny about him. It's funny.
yeah.
The other day I was putting them to bed, and a lot of times the last thing they ask me before I try to get them to sleep is to tell them about my work. I don't know how this started, but they started doing this now. It's part of the routine. And I actually got to where I could explain my work as secretary,
Yeah.
because they understood transportation, right? They know what trucks and bridges and planes are, and I tried to explain it that way. So now I was thinking about how to answer the question, and one thing that I am doing by way of employment, one day a week I teach at the University of Chicago, and so I explained to our daughter. I said, "Well, right now I'm working as a teacher for grown-ups," and she said, "You're not a teacher." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I'm sort of a teacher for grown-ups," and then she looked really sad, and she said, "But I thought you were my papa." I said, "Well, yeah, no,
Aw,
totally, definitely that, but also have this work." And
she
she
doesn't
said,
want dad to go back to work.
"Yeah," and then she says, "It's hard to be both." I was like,
Yeah,
"Boy, you have put your finger on something." And as a 3-year old, it is hard to. Luckily, my Chicago
yeah,
gig is not nearly as demanding as public service was. But anyway, bottom line, they're doing great. They're doing all the things 3-year-olds do. It's chaotic and beautiful, and I'm really thankful to have this time with them.
yeah. Let me ask you, because you mentioned the campaign a little earlier. You said, well, not everything was perfect going into the election. If there was one thing you could go back and change, and you weren't on the ticket, but if there was one thing you could go back and change, one thing that the Democrats should have talked about more, have you been able to put your finger on that?
Yeah, there's plenty of things. Look,
Yeah,
for 2 or 3 years running, our party should have been clearer about the border being a real problem, about immigration policy, and what we were doing about it, and conveyed the difference that it made when there was the executive action. Though that came in the fourth year, I think if that had come in the second year instead, things might have been very different. I think that we rightly felt it was our job to point out the things that were going well in the economy, but really struggled to make it clear that we understood what was going wrong in the economy.
yeah,
And I think we got painted into a corner because we care so deeply, and rightly so, about making sure that vulnerable groups don't get discriminated against. We allowed Republicans to make it sound like we only cared about certain groups when
mm,
our whole guiding light is to make sure that everybody can thrive in this country.
Yeah. And will you kill me if I ask this? Did President Biden wait too long to get out? That's the one that's been on my mind, and I'm just wondering what you think.
I don't know what would have happened if he'd made his decision
Yeah.
earlier. It's easy to imagine, to speculate, coulda, woulda, shoulda. The reality
Yeah.
is we don't know. I mean, one thing we do know is that the incumbent government, the incumbent party, uh, pretty much any developed country in the last couple years
Yep.
struggled, and I think we saw that dynamic play out.
Yeah.
But of course, you do ask yourself if if the VP had a year, or if we had a whole open primary process, what would things have been like? And just by definition, all we can do about that is speculate.
And that's true. I mean, I had so many Democrats say to me during the camp, I just don't know that much about her. I wish I knew more about it. And the clock was ticking, time was running out. Um, what do you, last question here, jumping all over the place here at the end, then I'll let you go, I promise. Your thoughts on these rallies that are just coming out of nowhere? Because for a while there, it seemed like Democrats were in the fetal position.
Yeah.
They were a little despondent. Let's just to be diplomatic after the election was over. But there's some real fieriness that we're seeing out on the campaign trail now, and these town people are pissed. They're pissed
Yeah.
the f off. They're angry. They're angry at Elon Musk. They're really angry at Donald Trump. What are you seeing out there when you're seeing these rallies?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful and really important to see what's going on, and I think it's happening for a couple of reasons. One,
Yeah,
you got a lot of folks who maybe went along with this, or they even voted for this administration, but they didn't vote for this. They didn't vote for this kind of sloppy recklessness on national security. They didn't vote for DOGE. They didn't vote for their Social Security to be messed with, or
yeah,
Medicaid to be cut, or all these services people count on to be put on the chopping block. They definitely didn't vote for Project 2025 or trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the rich. So they see this and they say, wait a minute, you told me that if I voted for you, maybe you'd make my life better. And at the very least, prices would start going down. And instead, the opposite's happening and people are pissed.
yeah,
The other thing that I think is happening is there is a moment of kind of moving on from just being just kind of transfixed or stupefied by this kind of barrage of news. And I think that did have Democrats kind of almost frozen for a while.
yeah,
But I think right now what we're seeing is that people do expect someone to stand up and fight for them. And this idea that we can just sit back and let them screw it up and then they'll get blamed for it, I think is, first of all, the wrong answer for the country. And also, I don't think it's smart politics, because
yeah,
while this group that's in charge right now is obviously not fantastic at responsible government, they are very, very talented at shifting blame. So
yeah,
let's speak up before and not after they screw everything up. But
yeah,
just as importantly, talk about what we do differently. And that's the other thing I think people are really craving. Not just a
yeah.
strong opposition, not just a powerful critique, not just the zinger explaining why what they're doing is so bad. Show what we'd be doing that's a lot better.
Yeah. Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We could go on, and we'll just do that another time if it's okay.
I
I'll
love it.
bother you again in the future. And best of luck on Substack. You're already blowing up, so I'm seeing this in my rearview mirror. Images may be faster or closer than they appear, whatever that thing is that you see on the side view mirror. Pete Buttigieg, great to talk to you. Have fun with the kids. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate the time.
Same here. Thanks a lot.
All
Enjoyed
right,
it.
take care. Take care. All right.